how the Putin regime is likely to end. First, I think a very important moment is the amount of internal conflict that exists within Russia. Namely, there are two areas that are having the most conflict that we should pay attention to. As we've seen over the past 2.5 years, Russians themselves are very unlikely to take to the streets and to try to overthrow Putin. I have no expectation that that is what will occur. Rather, I think that the factions, either in the military and intelligence service, or those within the oligarchy, will decide to topple the Putin regime. And one might ask, why is that likely to occur? Well, as much as the oligarchs, for instance, might be able to thank Putin for their rise and for being able to protect them over more than 2.5 decades from the crimes that they are engaged in and prevent them from being investigated for those crimes, and to allow them to continue to rob the state of all of its assets, they ultimately have a different interest as well. That is that Putin himself is simply old. He's over 70 years old, in fact. He could die at any time. And one of the reasons that should alarm people that are in his circle is that Putin's secret to success, how he's been able to stay in power for so long, is that he was able to divide the oligarchy. He was able to play one oligarch off another oligarch. They're willing to fight with each other. They'd love to kill each other and take each other's assets. The only thing slowing them back at this point is Vladimir Putin. He doesn't want bloodshed in Moscow. He doesn't want them to fight. But he does want them to always be at each other's throats so that he's the peacemaker. He's the arbitrator of justice, thus giving him security. He's needed by everybody. But let's imagine you're an oligarch who's got enough wherewithal to realize that Putin one day will end. And when he does, somebody else will come to power. And let's imagine two different scenarios. One scenario, you're not the faction that comes to power. Rather, you're the faction that gets wiped out by the new power holders. Those who take power in the Kremlin are more than likely to come after you, to kill you, to liquidate your assets, and to take them for themselves. You can be almost certain that you and your family will stop existing, because those who take power have a very direct and very clear reason to not want to be challenged. Russia, fundamentally, is a mafia state. As Gary Kasparov has often said, it's wrong to analyze Russia through the traditional microscope that we use when we're examining countries, to look at how state actors behave. Rather, it's better to understand Russia as it really is. It's a group of mafia thugs who are interested in their self-interest and self-enrichment, and most importantly, their own self-survival, that really holds the Kremlin together. So if you come to the realization that, you know what, there's a good chance that after Putin, it'll be the end of me. Now, what gain do you have to keep Putin around? You realize he will eventually die, perhaps in the near future. Wouldn't it be wiser to take the reins, to dictate your own destiny, than to just wait for happenstance, for a heart attack, to take Putin out of the equation? Or even worse, for another faction of the military or of the intelligence services to decide that it's going to cooperate with a faction of the oligarchy that's opposed to you to take power, which will guarantee your own demise? No. Much wiser is to go make those alliances now with the military or the intelligence service, or both, even better, to make sure that you are able to take power in the country. But let's look more deeply at the military and the intelligence services. Vladimir Putin himself, a former KGB man, is very directly linked to the FSB, which he was the director of before becoming the leader of Russia. Putin has a great deal of faith in the FSB, so much so, in the case of Kursk, Russia, part of the oblast currently being under Ukrainian occupation, Vladimir Putin took the military off the job, the senior leadership, and in fact turned the leadership of the mission to expel the Ukrainians over to the FSB. Now imagine how all the Russian military officers interpret that. They've been kicked to the curb, where The intelligence services, their nemesis, have risen in the ranks. Worse than that, adding insult to injury, the FSB for months now has been prosecuting senior military officials in Russia for corruption, something that doesn't endear the FSB to the Russian military. You can be very sure there's very few people sitting in Moscow at the Russian equivalent of the Pentagon trying to think of ways that they can help the FSB to regain control of the Kursk Oblast of Russia. Rather, they're trying to figure out how they can screw them over and stick it to them to prevent them from rising further in the ranks and pushing the military further to the side. The FSB, known truly as a criminal organization that is in cooperation with foreign actors, both state actors and non state actors such as Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, non state actors such as drug cartels, such as Islamic terrorist organizations, operates globally to bring in money. Money that's illicit. It's in no way done really to benefit Russia. It's really just a form of the mafia, an extension of their international practices to gain more wealth. But now that military and that intelligence service are at each other's throats. As we saw when Prigozhin tried to take power in Russia, there was a total breakdown of Russia's intelligence services. The police, the border guards, the National Guard, Kadyrov's Chechens, the Southern Command of the Russian military, the local population in Rostov, Russia, nobody came to abet the Kremlin. Nobody tried to slow down Prigozhin. Rather, senior military officers in Rostov sat and drank coffee in the street, and they chatted with Prigozhin about what he was doing. And they didn't try to arrest him. Rather, they asked questions like, why are you doing this? You know, it's better not to. It's better just to go back the way things are. But why didn't they stand up to Prigozhin? My hypothesis is that it's the same reason that when I myself was in Kursk, Russia, just last month, I was surprised by the number of Russian citizens who were happy to converse with Ukrainian soldiers, of whom they were not scared, but even more happy to curse the name of Vladimir Putin, their hatred for him being quite intense. Now, why is that? I think it's very clear that they themselves know that Putin is nothing but a threat to them, who pulls them down. He does not bring them anything. But they also are powerless. They lack agency. Those that have force, those that have power, are limited really only to the oligarchy, which Putin, I think, in a great miscalculation, has allowed them to have also military companies, private military companies, and private armies de facto, or security companies. That has taken away his monopoly of force, monopoly of violence, which in political science is a key indicator of a state, is that it has control over violence. Well, he's given that away to the private sector in many cases, which will allow them to have enough soldiers and weaponry to fight with each other over assets once he falls. So looking ahead, how will Putin end? We cannot be certain, of course, but I think that there are more and more signs of instability within the military, within the intelligence service. And no matter who were to try to take power, who in the oligarchy were to cut a deal with the military and the intelligence service, the local population would be very unlikely to stand up and try to save Putin. Most importantly, in the post-revolutionary phase of, in general, is the most dangerous part for any sort of coup plotters. And why is that? Well, let's imagine you overthrow power. Your actual claim to it is very weak. You are a usurper. You weren't democratically elected, nor did anybody really choose you. You just killed your predecessor. So what will keep you in power? Well, being able to maintain the capital with enough soldiers that will fight for you is key. And that's why I think that any oligarch who were to try to overthrow Putin is very likely to call back the soldiers from Ukraine and very likely to call the soldiers in other locations where they aren't really necessary. They're just part of Russia's colonialism. Call them back to Moscow to protect the capital, to preserve their own power, because that's a priority of any coup plotter, as his life truly is at risk after he's illegitimately overthrown a government. So when Putin is looking at all this, what does he see? Increasingly, I think that Putin does not see much. From all that we know, Putin rarely shows up to meetings. When he does, he's been known to arbitrarily stand up, say he'll be right back, to drive several kilometers away, to go for a swim for an hour, to go to the sauna, get redressed, drive back to the meeting where he expects everybody to be waiting for him, and then continues with it. These little power plays, these little power games are important for him, but they're actually hurting his general system. There's more and more frustration with him. It's more and more obvious that he is not adept to being able to prosecute the war in Ukraine. Something that I think that ultimately will be one of the major reasons that he's overthrown by those that are near and dear to him. When it will happen is unsure, but the weakening financial situation in Russia, with now a key interest rate that in the past year has moved from 8% to 19%, along with inflation that realistically might be greater than 30%, are all things that are probably very bad signs for Putin's regime. The housing bubble right now is about to bust, and it will eventually bust because it is simply a bubble, as they always do in economic bubbles. Something that will create great tension and a lot of pain within Russia. So, Putin's end, we cannot be sure of how it will happen, but I have a very strong reason to believe that it'll be sudden. And the end of the war in Ukraine will not be something that takes weeks and months. It could be something that happens in a matter of hours